July 1965 in Provence was exactly as it should be: hot, dry, and saturated with the thick, intoxicating aroma of blooming lavender. The endless purple fields of Valençol stretched under a dazzlingly blue sky, buzzing with bees and cicadas. Maurice Mass, a middle-aged farmer, a man of the earth whose hands were calloused from work and whose face was weathered by sun and wind, surveyed his lavender field with love and pride. Lavender was his life, his income, a part of himself. He knew every bush, every stone on his land. It was early morning, the sun just beginning to rise over the hills, painting the sky in soft peach tones. The air was still fresh, but the promise of daytime heat was already palpable. Mass went out into the field for his usual morning inspection before starting the long workday. The silence was almost absolute, broken only by the chirping of awakening birds. And then he heard a strange sound. Not loud, whistling, somewhat like the rustle of wind in dense foliage, but there was no wind. The sound was intermittent, unnatural. Mass frowned. He looked towards the direction the sound came from and saw the tops of lavender bushes swaying in the far end of the field, near a small oak tree. His first thought was annoyance. Those neighbor kids again. Decided to play hide and seek in my lavender. The rascals. He had chased them off his field many times before, fearing they would trample the precious bushes. Sighing irritably, Mass resolutely headed there, ready to scold the uninvited guests. He walked along the narrow path between the rows of lavender, inhaling its calming scent, but his irritation mingled with slight anxiety. The sound was too strange, and the bushes moved differently than if children were hiding there. Approaching closer, about 50 meters away, he stopped dead in his tracks. A scene unfolded before his eyes that didn't fit into any framework of ordinary reality. There were no children there. Right in the middle of his lavender field, next to the old oak tree, stood an object. It had the shape of a huge egg or a rugby ball placed vertically. It was about the size of a small car, perhaps slightly larger. Its surface was smooth, matte, grayish metallic in color, without windows, doors, or visible seams. The object wasn't resting on the ground, but was supported by 6 thin, seemingly telescopic legs or supports, which were gently pressed into the earth beneath it. The same quiet, barely perceptible whistling or hissing sound that had caught Mass's attention emanated from the object. But the most incredible thing wasn't that. Next to the object stood 2 figures. They were short, just over a meter tall, and their proportions were entirely non-human. Their heads were enormous, pear-shaped, completely bald, and disproportionately large compared to their thin bodies. The skin on their faces was deathly pale, almost white. Their faces were flat, with tiny, barely noticeable features where the nose and ears should be. But the eyes were huge, slanted, dark, without pupils or whites, occupying most of the face. These unblinking eyes were fixed directly on Maurice Mass with a tense, unreadable expression, neither fear, nor curiosity, nor hostility, just intense, scrutinizing observation. The beings were dressed in tight-fitting, one-piece jumpsuits of a grayish-green color that covered their bodies from neck to feet. Their movements were stiff, almost mechanical. One of the beings held an object in its hands resembling a short metal tube or wand. It was moving this device over the lavender bushes, as if scanning them or collecting samples. The second being simply stood nearby, looking at the farmer. Maurice Mass stood paralyzed by a mixture of fear and astonishment. Thoughts raced through his head. Who were they? What was this machine? What did they want in his field? He instinctively took a step back, then another. But some force, perhaps simple human curiosity or the sense of being the master of his own land, made him stop and even take a step forward. He wanted to understand what was happening. He wanted to protect his field. He took a couple more steps, closing the distance to about 20 meters. At that moment, the being with the tube turned towards him. It raised its device and pointed it directly at Mass. The farmer didn't have time to react. He didn't see a beam of light in the conventional sense, but he felt a sudden impact. Not physical, but rather energetic. His entire body was instantly immobilized. Muscles refused to obey. He couldn't move or scream. The air around him seemed to thicken, to vibrate. His head spun, colored spots swam before his eyes. He felt his consciousness slipping away, sinking into a viscous, warm darkness. The last thing he saw were the huge, unblinking eyes of the being fixed on him. How long he was unconscious, or in that strange paralyzed state, he didn't know. He awoke suddenly, lying on the ground between the rows of lavender. The first sensation was a dull headache and slight nausea. His muscles still felt weak, unresponsive. He managed to sit up, looked around. The sun had risen higher. The day was brightening. The clearing by the oak tree was empty. No object, no strange beings. Only trampled lavender bushes and 6 distinct, deep indentations in the earth where the craft had stood on its supports. The silence was deafening. Mass struggled to his feet. His head was still spinning. He approached the landing site. The ground in this spot felt strangely hard, almost baked, and a faint, unfamiliar smell, like sulfur or ozone, emanated from it. The lavender immediately surrounding the indentations looked wilted, its purple flowers having lost their color as if scorched by an invisible heat. The farmer rubbed his temples. Had he dreamt it? A hallucination from waking up early and the heat? But the indentations in the ground were real. The damaged lavender was real. The headache and weakness were real. He slowly trudged home, trying to make sense of the experience. He told no one about it. Who would he tell? That he saw an egg-shaped craft on legs and big-headed dwarfs with giant eyes in the middle of his field? They would think him crazy, sunstruck, or drunk early in the morning. He kept silent, but the image of the beings and the paralyzing sensation from their weapon haunted him. Time passed. The wound on his land, at the landing site of the mysterious craft, did not heal. That summer, and for several years after, nothing grew on that patch of ground. The soil remained hard, barren, as if poisoned. The surrounding lavender grew as usual, but this spot gaped like an ugly bald patch. It was a constant, silent reminder of that morning. The inability to grow anything on this piece of his native land tormented Mass almost more than the ridicule he feared. Eventually, he couldn't bear it and shared his story. First with his wife, then with a few close friends, then rumors reached local authorities and journalists. The reaction varied. Some believed, some sympathized, but most were skeptical. One day, during an interview with a researcher who came from the city, Maurice Mass was shown a drawing. It was a sketch made by American police officer Lonnie Zamora, depicting an object he had seen land a year earlier, in 1964, in the desert area of Socorro, New Mexico, USA. The drawing showed an egg-shaped craft on 4 supports, near which Zamora had seen 2 small figures in white jumpsuits. Upon seeing this drawing, Maurice Mass exclaimed in astonishment, "Mon Dieu! Look, someone else saw my UFO." The similarity between the objects, despite the different number of supports, was striking. For him, it was a form of confirmation. He hadn't gone mad. He had seen something real, something that other people had seen too, even on the other side of the world. Neither Maurice Mass's case nor Lonnie Zamora's case, in itself, proves the existence of extraterrestrial life. But they, especially Zamora's case, witnessed by an active police officer with an impeccable reputation, are among the most compelling testimonies that something, strange craft with incomprehensible/unknown passengers, did indeed land on our planet and interact with humans. The renowned ufologist Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who personally investigated Zamora's case and interviewed him multiple times, had no doubt about the officer's veracity. Although Hynek could not provide a definitive explanation for what happened, he was convinced of the reality of the phenomenon. There is a large body of evidence indicating that we are dealing with a very real phenomenon of uncertain nature. If what Zamora in Socorro and Mass in Valençol saw were not alien spacecraft, then what were they? Whose secret technology? Or something entirely different, beyond our comprehension? Where did they come from? And why did they land in these remote locations? And who were these strange, big-headed, large-eyed beings observing people with their unblinking gazes? These questions remain unanswered, turning the stories of Maurice Mass and Lonnie Zamora into classic ufology mysteries that stir minds and imaginations.